We're back with Coffee with the Candidates. The topic now is the 22nd Congressional District. All of the candidates running for that position have been invited to join us. Here today, Keisha Rogers, Democrat, Stephen Sussman, Libertarian, and Don Cook from the Green Party. Congressman Pete Olson did not attend. As we always, this is a collaboration between the KPRC Local 2 and the League of Women Voters, and it's always a great thing that they do to come out and be a part of this nonpartisan discussion and dialogue. We have with us Amy Turney, who will be asking questions this morning, as well as Linda Cohn, and both of them will have the honor of starting the questions this morning.
I have a policy question for y'all, and I'd like to start with Mr. Sussman. Our area has become a major hub for human trafficking in the United States. Are you in favor of increasing funding to provide law enforcement and prosecutions against traffickers? And are you in favor of the federal government increasing funding for victim and survivor services?
Well, as our government stands now, we're broke, but this is the greatest human tragedy of them all, and we need to do something. Our borders aren't protected, and that's the number one thing that we need to do this cycle in Congress. So we do need to find some way to fund this program.
Thank you. Ms. Rogers?
Yes, I would be in favor of increasing the funding because what we have to address is the economic collapse and the fact that human trafficking is brought on when you have a system that is broken down. And so in order to fix that system, we have to make sure that we're actually not cutting the budget to our law enforcement, and also that we're not bailing out the crooked people on Wall Street. And so that means my policy is I'm calling for the Glass-Steagall Act, the full reinstatement of Glass-Steagall banking reorganization. And this is how we will be able to deal with this crisis at hand. It's a cultural crisis, and it's also a question of the collapse of the system. And so, yes, I would call for the full for further funding to address this issue.
Thank you.
I'm in favor of increasing funding in many areas because for the sake of the economy, but I'm very definitely opposed to slavery, which is what human trafficking is, and is slavery in the worst form. So certainly this is an area to increase spending, funding. I think part of your question included treatment, and I think that would be a very large part of what would be called for. Perhaps I'll emphasize the libertarian position, although I'm Green Party though, and say that what's done between consenting adults might be one thing, but well, slavery is another.
Thank you. Thank you. Linda?
Mindful of what's going on right as we speak in the Mid-Atlantic area, what is the proper role of the federal government in helping areas that have meteorological mayhem or other acts of nature?
That's for me. Yes, ma'am. What's happening right now is the same thing that's happened in Hurricane Katrina, but we must focus on keeping law enforcement in check too. As in Katrina, we had a lot of illegal gun confiscations and invasion of people's property by law enforcement. The government is really not here to help in these cases other than humanitarian aid and not to act in a law enforcement. FEMA has had quite a bit of wasteful practices in the past. That organization needs to be streamlined and needs to have a watchful public eye upon them at all times.
Ms. Rogers? Well, one of my platforms has been for the full funding of NASA, and this means that we need weather satellite systems. We need to be able, which have been shut down under this current administration. We need to actually have a full funding of our NOAA program. We need to have policies which are going to address the fact that how do we actually protect the population addressing this severe weather crisis. But in order to do that, what we need is a science driver program. We need a full funding of our NASA, NOAA, our space weather capabilities, and then also to be able to address this crisis, we also need to make sure that we have on the grounds the ability for people to move in emergency relief. And this emergency relief has to come from the federal government. I mean, here in Texas, we've seen, when you actually have these instruments in place, what happens when, such as, for instance, we had the 1801 Galveston storm, and many people remember the history about that and what it did to wipe out thousands of people. We have to make sure that our system is secured from the standpoint that if we have severe weather threats like this, how is the federal government going to come in and act to defend the lives of the people on the ground?
Thank you. Mr. Cook?
My belief is that the only purpose of government is to help the people. And that certainly involves or includes helping the people in a disaster situation. This would dovetail nicely with another idea of mine for a national workforce reserve. We have people who are unemployed and don't look like there's any jobs for them. If nothing else, we should be able to hold them in reserve, give them special training some days a week, encourage them to come up with useful projects and things that need to be done, and train them perhaps very specifically in disaster relief and using disaster relief equipment and all facets of that.
Is there a role for the military in helping civilian populations that may be disadvantaged by the storm, Mr. Sussman?
Well, I think the military is best in the area of opening up the roads, getting the water out, things such as that. Their interaction is unconstitutional with policing the public, so I'd be very cautious on that tack.
Ms. Rogers?
Absolutely. That was the position of our Army Corps of Engineers. I think that the Army Corps of Engineers would be essential for going in on the grounds. I mean, you've seen this in places such as Haiti with the storms, such as here in the United States with Katrina and other places. But that means we have to actually have the full funding of our military, our Army Corps of Engineers. We have to stop these insane bailouts and give them the opportunity to be able to go in and do their job.
Thank you. Mr. Cook, did you want to respond to that as well?
Please. Yes, while I'm generally in favor of increasing spending in all areas for the sake of economic investment and ending any prospect of a slump and the impending fiscal cliff we're about to go off, I would like to see generally a decrease in the spending by the military for war and violence efforts, and perhaps a redirecting to a large extent of those services into providing civilian assistance in these situations.
Mr. Cook, what elements do you believe need to be included in a comprehensive immigration policy?
Let's see if I can remember what I wrote for you folks. I remember puzzling about that one because I was thinking about it in terms of elements, but generally I would like to see it much easier for people to come to this country. And let me frame this a little bit differently by pointing out that I just started on Social Security. And there's people that expressed some concerns about Social Security, and I want a strong, large workforce continuing to pay in through the many, many decades I intend to continue to live for medical and other life needs. So I think we should have an immigration policy which encourages enough workers at all times. One of the general problems of the world, actually, that needs to come about is decreasing the population, and this will decreasing the population and as the population grows older will be a pretty tricky problem. And I think we need the freedom. People need the freedom to move about on the surface of the earth to places where they might be needed.
Thank you. Ms. Rogers?
I didn't get to the components very well, but
comprehensive immigration policy. Repeal NAFTA and repeal the free trade policies that have continue to push forth to make this question of how we're going to deal with the comprehensive immigration policy. We actually have to have a real economic recovery program, put people back to work. The reason people want to stay in their own countries, and if they don't, the biggest problem that all countries are facing right now is a major economic collapse. The food production is dwindling right now, unemployment rates are skyrocketing, and we can't address immigration problem unless we address the fact that we have a breakdown of the entire financial system and economic system. So we have to address the employment rate across the nation, but the first thing we're going to do is we have to have a repeal of the NAFTA and the free trade policies that are looting and destroying nations, especially here in the United States.
And this is where I agree with Ms. Rogers. NAFTA is of no benefit to this country whatsoever. We also must reduce the paperwork, reduce the lawyer involvement, reduce the cost of becoming a citizen to combat this problem. I do have the framework of a bill in my computer at home should I be called to take this seat, and would offer that to Congress and ask for their input to improve the immigration policy, because it needs a vast overhaul.
I have a question. You all are running for that one seat, congressperson in District 22. The incumbents always have a tremendous advantage. And this incumbent we're talking about now won the last time with about almost 70%, 67% of the vote. Are you realistically competing for the opportunity to win this, or are you realistic competing just to get your ideas out and make sure that your ideas can be heard?
Well, we should ask the incumbent that, since he didn't bother to show up.
I know why he's not here, but I'm thinking about, you're trying to win that position. Are you trying to win it because you want to be a representative, or are you just trying to run so you can get your ideas out? Because it's a real uphill battle for you, and you all knew that when you started to run.
Right. Well, I'll speak on that one first. I mean, for me personally, I have winning the Democratic nomination 2 times in a row with the platform that I have. In terms of my platform, has to be that this president has to be removed now. I'm calling for the full funding of NASA's manned space program, ending of the Wall Street bailouts, and a return to a credit program to invest in large-scale infrastructure projects. These are not just policies and a platform so that I can speak to the population. They are policies that have to be adopted in our population, in the Congress at this moment in time. And the fact that there's no qualified leadership that's addressing this collapse. I'm not only trying to get this platform out there, but I'm trying to make sure that this is the platform that is going to be brought into Congress. And I'm already working with Congress members as we speak now on restoring Glass-Steagall banking reorganization to end the Wall Street bailouts. More and more people know that unemployment rate is atrocious right now. What are we going to do about it? We need a full funding of our NASA manned space program. This is not just to run to have a voice out there. This is that we need competent leadership, and what the current incumbent has done has showed that he has not provided competent leadership to address the issues at hand.
Stephen?
This, simply put, the incumbent is beholden to his corporate donors. He doesn't care about the people in this district, and he has caused irreparable damage to our Bill of Rights, virtually using it as a doormat. I care, he doesn't, bottom line.
I want to implement my ideas. I don't just want to talk about them and discuss them with people. I want to sit in the seat and discuss those ideas with my fellow congressmen and women. Now, perhaps I don't have the resources and the advantage in this campaign that the incumbent does, but he's got to run again in 2 years, doesn't he?
Sure.
So I'm going to keep on running.
I'll ask you all my favorite question about voting rights. Do you think that it would be a good idea to have a nationwide voter registration program so that as people move from state to state, they don't have to re-register? Ms. Rogers?
A nationwide voter
nationwide
registration.
voter registration program.
No, I think they should re-register in the states they're in.
I think that should remain in the states. That's akin to a national ID, which I vastly oppose.
Mr. Cook?
Well, I think that civil rights override states' rights and federal rights. And if there were, as you propose, I had not seriously thought of it before, but my first reaction is that there are a lot of other serious problems to look at. You know, I mean, and I don't mean that that's not a serious consideration, but I think that uniformity in democracy is an important civil right, and I almost have to call it so-called democracy, that there's not a lot of equality and fairness in terms of those from state to state. I think there are probably a whole bunch of constitutional amendments, a bill of democracy, as it were, that should be added to the Constitution, and that might be something to add to it. I'll put it on my list. I think I'm up to 13 now.
Yeah, let me follow through and then ask you if you think that there's still a place for the Voting Rights Act, as it's supervised by the federal government when it comes to voting activities. Is there still a place for that? As a congressman, you may be called upon to express an opinion. Ms. Rogers, again, you first.
Yes, I think there's still a place for the Voting Rights Act, and I know that we've had are facing some major troubles right now in terms of what's happening with some of the attacks on the Voting Rights Act. And also, what I can say about that is that it's a place for us to understand how we have to actually change the system overall, the voting system overall. And what I mean by that is to change the structure of the party system. And I think the party system gets to a problem of what we face in terms of some of the challenges we face with voting rights right now. My platform is that we have to return to a party system that gets rid of a party platform and goes back to the interest of the nation first and foremost before the party. And that's how you deal with the problems of voting rights problems. That's how you deal with the problems of what's going on right now, where you have vote fraud happening. It's because of the fact a lot of vote fraud has come from the fact that people have been more immersed in my party versus your party versus we're acting in the interest of the nation.
Mr. Sessions, you agree?
Yes, there's been too much focus on party instead of the individuals, and we've seen a lot of turmoil in the GOP lately with the Ron Paul and Mitt Romney debacle. We need to review all of these policies, reform. I'd like to see a return to paper ballots. I am highly suspicious of the electronic voting. I am highly suspicious of the source codes being contaminated. So I'm definitely in for the reform.
Could you hit the highlights of the question again? I couldn't
The
quite hear.
Voting Rights Act, for or against, would you vote to continue it?
The Voting
Federal
Rights Act.
protections allowed by the Voting Rights Act.
The one to help people vote.
Not HAVA, not Help America Vote Act, but the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Okay. Yes. Well, and that points out that act points out the intrusion. I hate to use that word, put it that way, but my vocabulary fails me at the moment. Of the federal government into the area of voting and democracy, because it directly concerns civil liberties, and it continues to be a concern. The things that they're doing now, the way they're applying them unevenly to states that have a history of violation of voting rights, and then ignoring the same things going on in states that don't have perhaps the same extreme history, but have the same effect of, well, frankly, helping or hurting one party over another. Democracy should be independent of party, and since we're mentioning parties, things that are done, which I won't go into, to discourage third parties should be eliminated. Everybody should be on an equal foot, And I might as well say it, money needs to be taken out of the system so that we don't have a plutocratic democracy, but a real democracy.
We've been talking with candidates for District 22, the congressional district there. I'd like to thank Don Cook for coming in, as well as Stephen Sussman and Keisha Rogers for coming in. Thank you all for being a part of it.